if I'm correct. So this short presentation here will look at some of the opportunities through the SEZ through which entrepreneurs can, develop their businesses and also invest in Jamaica and further the economy. All right. So the Jamaica Special Economic Zone Authority was established in 2016. So I asked about the free zone because underneath the Special Economic Zone Act of 2016, this would have repealed the Free Zone Act and the activities underneath the free zone. So underneath the free zone, there was a limited amount of activities that could be carried out. So that was manufacturing, processing, etc. for export. Whereas the Special Economic Zone is wider and has opened that range for investors both locally and internationally to come in, where there's just a small list of activities that are considered prohibited as opposed to the other way around, right? So the authority was created to facilitate and regulate SEZs. We also recommend designated locations for establishing SEZs, and we work to attract new and diverse investment and continue to facilitate businesses so the ease of doing business is a smooth one. So what is a special economic zone? So a special economic zone is a designated geographical location. So it's a physical location that can be set up in any part of the island, right? So it just has to be demarcated by specific and clear boundaries. And within these boundaries, you have specific economic regulations regarding tax, trade, and investment that would not normally apply to the rest of the country. So whatever regulations we have within that zone is going to be different from the rest of the country. Now, within Jamaica's SEZ regime, currently we have about 196 active SEZ stakeholders, and these stakeholders are spread across 11 parishes, and that totals approximately 32 million square feet. Now, these activities range within the different industries. So we have manufacturing, processing, anything having to do with industrials. We have commercial spaces, areas for training, for research, development, and many other areas. Now, how can an entrepreneur use the SEZ, within this environment to do business? You can enter the SEZ regime under 3 statuses, but we're going to really focus on the main 2, which is the developer and the occupant. And under the developer, we're also going to focus on the single entity developer. We'll still talk about the multi-purpose developer. The multi-purpose developer is that entity or that individual that leases space to multiple tenants. So you find your plot of land, you find your building or your area, you send in an application, and that application, once it has gone through the process and is approved, then the area would have been SEZ designated. From there, you would get your occupants or your tenants. They would also submit applications through you to us. And then once everything is approved, both you and your tenants would have access to the incentives of the regime. As a single entity developer, you would find your own space and get it designated as well. The only difference is that you'd be the only person operating and occupying the space. The second status is the occupant, and it is as the name says. So you're going to occupy space within the multipurpose development or the multipurpose zone. So you would lease the space from the multipurpose developer, and to have access to the fiscal incentives, you would have to submit an application through your developer to the authority. The zone user here does not receive any fiscal incentives. However, the zone user provides supporting services to the other tenants within the zone. And the reason they don't, there are two main reasons why they don't receive fiscal incentives or the benefits. And this is one, the zone user is normally an established business, and we'll talk about that further in the presentation, or they are carrying out activities that are deemed prohibited under the SEZ Act. Now, this is the juicy part of the SEZ regime. This is debate, as persons would call it. So the fiscal benefits of being a part of the SEZ regime. The first thing we have is reduced corporate income tax. Now, the corporate income tax rate currently stands at 25%, but this would be reduced to 12.5%. And there is even further potential for this to be reduced to 7.75%. And this is with the application of the capital allowance, the employee tax credit, and the promotional tax credit. So underneath the capital allowance, let's say you brought in equipment or other resources, your computers, these all attract a value, and over time they may depreciate. So when you are filing your tax documents to the TAJ, if it is that these resources you have, your equipment, such and such, have depreciated over time, the value of that can be used to lower your income tax rate that you pay once filed on time and filed correctly. Same for employee tax credit. So your employee tax credit looks at the tax that is paid by employees or through the employer. So your educational tax, your NIS, NHT, etc. Once these are filed correctly and on time, then that can contribute to reducing the corporate income tax as well. And lastly, for your promotional tax credit, so monies or resources spent on research and development that can also be filed in efforts to reduce your income tax rate as well. Underneath the SEZ regime, companies pay no GCT on goods and services that are purchased locally, that is entering your zone, your SEZ zone. The same applies for customs duty on goods imported directly into the SEZ. So you imported something, it's out by the wharf. Once it's leaving the wharf to go directly into the zone, then you will pay no customs duty. However, if at some point your goods have to leave the zone and they're not being exported overseas, they're going back into the Jamaican public, then the applicable duties may become payable. Now, while there are fiscal benefits of the SEZ regime, there are several non-fiscal benefits that our stakeholders, have access to. The first is our work from home policy. Now, while the policy is still being finalized, underneath this policy, companies will be afforded, the possibility of 30% of their staff being able to work from home, while the remaining 70% would work physically within the SEZ. We have streamlined custom procedures, so our SEZs often benefit from more simplified custom procedures, which can expedite the movement of goods and reduce administrative burdens on their businesses. Infrastructural support, speaks to how our government would provide this support. So our improved transportation networks, we see as the highways are now, linking the different points of Jamaica, making traveling easier and shorter for our persons who are working or even just want to travel recreationally. We're seeing where we're becoming small as an island in terms of our connectivity, and this infrastructure really contributes to the conducive environment of businesses within the SEZ. Regulatory flexibility. So SEZs have access to specific regulatory flexibilities. So your licensing and permit processes become more simplified, and there is greater streamlined regulatory requirements and reduced bureaucratic hurdles. Workforce development assistance. The government collaborates with SEZ operators to provide workforce development programs, training initiatives, and access to skilled labor to meet the specific needs of companies operating within the SEZs. And lastly, and probably most importantly, within the Jamaica Special Economic Zone Authority, we have a unit called our Business Acceleration Unit. And within this unit, we have a center that facilitates the efficient provision of government services and support. So our SEZs have this unit specifically designated to them to cater to them and to assist in the different processes, licenses, and approvals that may be needed from time to time. Now, how would this apply for the micro, the small, and the medium enterprise? According to the SEZ Act, Section 2, MSME refers to an occupant that is a micro enterprise, small enterprise, or medium enterprise, right, as described in the second schedule. Now, the second schedule of the SEZ Act conveys the following definitions. So a micro enterprise is an enterprise with less than 3 employees or an annual turnover of less than 10,000 US dollars. A small enterprise is an enterprise with between 4 and 10 employees or an annual turnover ranging between 10,000 US dollars and 40,000 US dollars. And the medium enterprise is an enterprise between 11 and 50 employees or an annual turnover ranging between 40,000 US dollars and 150 US dollars. Now, for an MSME occupant, according to the fourth schedule, paragraph 2 of the Act, the eligibility criteria of the MSME occupant and the regular occupant are the same, but for one exception or one caveat. So the eligibility criteria, just 3, be a new company limited by shares. In this context and according to the Act, a new company refers to one which is yet to begin its operations in Jamaica. So you haven't been trading under this name. The name could have been registered from 1940, 1950, 1960, but as long as no activities, no commercial activities are taking place, then it would be considered a new company to Jamaica. If it is that the company was already existing, but it was existing in another country and it's just coming to Jamaica, we would also consider that a new company. The second criterion, be registered under the Companies Act of Jamaica. And thirdly, to show proof of issued and paid up share capital in the amount of US $25,000 initially and US $50,000 in investments within the first year of operation. And this is where the exception comes. Section 2B of the fourth schedule states that the MSME occupant has up to 4 years to show proof of investments amounting to US $25,000. So this is basically just a snapshot of how the SEZ can be used as, a leverage or a tool or a vehicle for smaller, medium-sized, and even our big entrepreneurs who have big dreams to open their businesses. And that is the end of my talk. Any questions?
So my question is,
What
how
type of
does it?
businesses are suited for?
Go ahead. I'm sorry. You go ahead first, and then I'll ask my question afterwards.
Okay, thank you. So the question is, what types of business are ideally suited for the SEZ?
Okay, so I will not tell you. How about I answer it this way, where I can tell you the activities that are prohibited, because we don't have a list of activities that can join. We just have a list of activities that are prohibited. Is that fine?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay. All right. So the list of prohibited activities are as follows. You have your extractive industries, so activities related to mining or quarrying. You have your public utilities, so companies such as JPS or NWC would not, meet the criteria to be within the regime. Real estate and property management services. So we're looking at companies such as your Remax or your Century 21 that focus mainly on residential development as opposed to commercial development. Those are considered prohibited. Financial services. So your banks, some of your financial institutions, those would be prohibited. You have your health services, so your pharmacies, doctor's offices, but this is excluding organizations that deal exclusively in research and development. Telecommunication services, so for example, your Digicel and Flow. Tourism, your catering services, retail, and more recently, intellectual property. So these activities have been deemed prohibited in an effort by the government to diversify the economic activities within the SEZs. So, for example, tourism, there are incentives offered by the government for persons or companies within the tourism industry as well. And what we're trying to, avoid is that we do not want any revenue leakages happening or in what we call double dipping. So we don't want it to be a case where companies are having access to, a myriad of incentives that may take away from the newer investment that would come from the new companies. So I believe that is 10 sets of activities. Outside of that, once you're carrying out an activity that is business to business based, you should be fine.
Thank you.
No problem.
All right, so
All right,
we'll
thank you
take
for
two
that.
questions. We'll take Marvin, and there was a question in the chat from Sabrina, after which we'll go into the panel discussions, and we can have more questions following that. Go ahead, Marvin.
Yep. Yes, I was wondering, how can a MSMEs or small business benefit from your organization, ma'am?
Okay, so we can go back to the fiscal incentives, right? So I know that starting a business can be hectic, it can be expensive. And while there are, for the SEZ regime, there are upfront costs. Having been a part of the SEZ regime, having those duty, concessions, those relief on your customs duty, the GCT, that will bring down the costs over time for smaller businesses to give them a chance to grow and expand further.
Thank you.
No problem. Okay, I see Sabrina had a question in the chat.
So the question was, she was asking you to explain the investment aspect of 25,000 US.
Okay, so this comes as one of the one aspect of the eligibility criteria to show proof of issued and paid up share capital. Simply speaking, that's just showing the amount of investment, the proof of investment in your project. So the US $25,000 is for occupants and for the MSMEs as well. So you're just showing proof that, hey, we've put this amount of money into the business, whether it be your board of directors, have each, have a share in the company, that can be converted into the amount. Now, it's important to note that this $25,000, you don't have to show proof of this in cash. It can be the value of the building or the plot of land that you are using, or it can be if, let's say, you've spent money on equipment. Let's say you're doing manufacturing and you've spent money on forklifts, you spent money on pallets. The value of that can also be used to show proof of your investment, right? And it can also be a combination of cash, can be a combination of proof. If you also speak to your chartered accountant, if it is that you can get a grant for this investment, that can also be used as proof as well.
Thank you for that, Brittany. All right, so what we're going to do now, I'm going to have the panel discussions. So let me once more share. All right. So next we have Miss Tamika Frame. She's a dynamic and visionary entrepreneur. She has been at the forefront of the microfinance sector since 2009. That marks 15 years. That's a major milestone, right? As a CEO and managing director of Ready Cash Financing Services Limited, she has successfully steered the company through various phases of growth and innovation. Tamika's expertise lies in her strategic business management, financial oversight, and fostering an environment conducive to sustainable growth. With a